Hey everybody, welcome back to my Star Wars show. I'm joined, as usual, as always, by Mr. Andrew Roscoe, and we're here today to talk about something a little bit different. Usually we're doing my Star Wars show episodes all about shows or about films, things of that nature. We're getting deep into a piece of Star Wars storytelling and pulling out various things, sharing our thoughts, but Andrew, we can't do that today. And one of the core reasons we can't do that is because Disney seemingly cannot get a Star Wars film to theaters. Um, we are recording this right after two interesting pieces of news broke. One was a very, very good expose from the Hollywood Reporter. I have it here. The name of the author is, drumroll please, because the page is loading, Boris Kitt over at the Hollywood Reporter. Wrote a really, really interesting piece a couple days ago about the sort of infighting right now at Lucasfilm and Disney, trying to identify the right projects, the right directors, the right direction for the future of Star Wars, and how basically everybody's off working their little projects that are maybe in competition with each other. Some people don't know what others are doing, and the TLDR is it's seemingly one big mess. Now, there's a second piece of news last night that one of the Star Wars movies on the 2026 release date slate was taken off and replaced with Ice Age. Now, this was a little bit misleadingly reported because before yesterday, Disney had two Star Wars films on the slate for 2026. So Mandalorian and Grogu still coming out. That movie, as far as we know, has like been shot or is in production. So it's escaped the sort of pre-production hell of a lot of its peers. But nonetheless, another big scheduling blow to the future of theatrical Star Wars. So we wanted to sit down today with that context in mind and chat about what we would do if we were put in charge of the Star Wars film vertical. Just sort of give our thoughts as fans and people who closely follow the entertainment industry. Just our thoughts about what needs doing to just get a Star Wars film back to theaters, because by the time we get Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026, it will have been, 7 years between theatrical Star Wars films, going all the way back to 2019 and Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time. It's been a very long time. So Andrew, where do you want to start? Do you want to start by lamenting the problem? Do you want to start by jumping into solutions? Where's your head at, considering all the news the last couple days?
Oh man, there's like so many different directions to go. I mean, I kind of want to eventually talk about the an excerpt from the report from Hollywood Reporter talking about how like drawing the parallels between writing the Old Testament and the New Testament. I thought was like a very interesting talking point.
Yeah.
Various ideas of, I mean, because they talk about like how within the film side, like everything's kind of hush hush, but like within the TV side or the Disney Plus side, like everything's kind of just going. Like it's like there's not really an issue there in terms of like there's like less. I don't know if there's less oversight, but like you're allowed to kind of push the buttons a little more in terms of like creativity and lore bending and stuff like that. Whereas the films are kind of like the sacred part of Star Wars that has to be like filtered and gone through the reviews and like, you know, closer closer eye on the script and all that kind of, you know, that's my magnifying glass kind of thing. And so like there's a lot of different things you can go through. Honestly, I think what they should have at least cemented, which I think is especially in the wake of like Top Gun Maverick, is do the X-Wing film. They should find a way to do that with I don't know if it's still Patty Jenkins, or I know they kind of I don't know what's going on with her anymore, but they kind of you know, have her on the hook around the fish line. It's like, okay, never mind, throw her back in the water. No, okay, well, maybe no, throw her back in the waters kind of thing going on. Just this like tugging game they have, this tug of war game they have with her. So, but even if it can't be her, I would love for them to do an X-Wing film. You have like, even if you don't, I know it's not like canon anymore, but there's like 7, 8, 9 maybe like X-Wing novels. They could just pick one and adapt one. You can just pick one and adapt one. And I like they talk about how like, oh, this isn't like Harry Potter or like Marvel where you have years and years of material to draw upon. It's already been pre-written, but like it has been pre-written. They've been drawing on it. That's what the TV side is. Thrawn and like Acolyte and all that stuff comes from comics or from the books that they have access to, and they just kind of don't want to do that for any of the films. And I kind of get that, like, because the films are what the general audience, your average Star Wars movie goer is not going to know all the stuff like the super fans who watch the shows and stuff, right? They're kind of, they skip the lesser grade deep Disney Plus stuff and like, okay, I'm just here for like the main numbered entries, right? They're not into like the side stuff probably. But I feel like you could just pick something from there, and just, make your changes that you need to do, and just give us something thrilling. Give us a summer blockbuster again. Even if it's not like a numerical or numbered entry, it doesn't have a little Roman numeral. You can do another Star Wars story. And I know they're kind of leery, or they're kind of weary about doing something like that because of Solo. But then didn't they just change like Andor to the subtitle of a Star Wars story? So like they clearly that brand of a Star Wars story is not dead. So they can still do something along those lines. I really just want to see like a high stakes X-wing shootout kind of, World War II, not World War II, but I mean like that kind of like that kind of stuff again. They can do that, especially with like Top Gun Maverick, which Top Gun before Maverick wasn't even like a name, like a brand. It wasn't really like a lauded, franchise, right? It was one movie before that. And like that movie just completely like blew everyone's expectations of what you can do with like a dormant IP, right? So if they could just find a way to do that with like, it could be X-wings, could be the ARC 170 Starfighter or whatever from the prequels. Like, do something. We have Poe's black and orange like X-wing. Like, you can do something really cool if they just buckled down and got really serious about doing something that's like, okay, it's been too long. We need to keep the public's interest in this brand somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting problem because you were citing before this quote here, and obviously these are all anonymous sources that Hollywood Reporter is going on, but one person here says that working on Star Wars, as you were saying, is like being asked to create the New Testament, referencing the fact that as the author here writes, quote, Star Wars at its core has been the original George Lucas movies, and nothing has been codified or made more canonical in modern times than those three movies. To filmmakers and executives, the first trilogy is the Old Testament. And I think what you're sort of identifying in this idea of a another sort of more like in the genre of war film movie, in a Starfighter movie, is a break from that. And I don't really understand why we can't have a break from this sort of canonical hold that the original trilogy has over all of Star Wars. Because another refrain throughout this whole Hollywood Reporter piece is this notion that Star Wars, in the eyes of Disney executives, is a brand that trades on nostalgia. And while I understand that that's an intrinsic part of Star Wars for sure, the references, the music, the visual motifs, everything like that, I think that the world of Star Wars is too rich for it to sit so closely adjacent to the original trilogy, which I love. But I really wonder why, and I wonder how many pitches this effect have come into Disney that deviate from it. Now, obviously, people have been bringing into conversation a lot this sort of real knee-jerk, larger cultural reaction to The Last Jedi, what Rian Johnson did to break Star Wars convention, sort of in some ways spit in the face of tradition in the interest of pushing Star Wars in a new direction. And there's no doubt that the backlash to that film has resulted in a pretty conservative approach to the brand from Disney, specifically theatrically. Rise of Skywalker is a lot of things, but one thing it is not is daring, at least in the way that Rian Johnson's movie was. The overarching point for me is how long is that feeling going to last, and why can't risk be taken to do what you're saying and simply try to explore the aesthetics of Star Wars and the characters and the plot beats outside of this very narrow sensibility for what Star Wars needs to be. I mean, if you do look at the a Star Wars story movies, Rogue One and Solo, I think, are both solid to very good.
Hmm.
Um, and part of why they're interesting is because they're outside the mode of storytelling you expect from Star Wars. One is very much a war film, and one is very much like a heist movie, and that's cool. And I'm not super sure why that idea of taking a genre and taking the aesthetics of Star Wars and pairing them to make something new hasn't really gone further. I think you can cite a lot of larger factors to why Solo didn't do well. I don't think it's intrinsically the fault of that movie being different. I think you can look at the casting. I think you can look at the fact that it was releasing 5 months after, 6 months after the Last Jedi. Like, there's a lot
That was pretty close, yeah.
that was going to lead to that film always having trouble. What I would really like to see is sort of a step away from what we know Star Wars to be, even further than what you're suggesting of genre. I would love to simply see a new Star Wars film that is not beholden to anything around it. Don't even tell us where it is on the timeline. Just make a movie. What I always go back to is this idea that George Lucas set out to make Star Wars, and in doing so, he was playing on Kurosawa films, and he was playing on serialized adventure programs he watched as a kid, and there's a real political ideology to the films, and obviously he was making something new. And then Star Wars, ever since, for the most part, even the best Star Wars, is making more Star Wars to some degree or another. Why can't we simply say, okay, we're going to take the resources we have and we're going to ostensibly totally reboot things? Doesn't have to be any Skywalkers, doesn't have to be any of this stuff. And maybe it doesn't work, but I think there needs to be the attempt made to say, hey, can we tell a story in this big universe with the Force and with the sort of underlying feeling of adventure and everything, but nothing else that's familiar? That's what I would really like to see. I'd be curious to know how much they've ever weighed that up when discussing Star Wars, if it really has always been, we cannot deviate. Because I think the lack of deviation is the issue more than anything.
Well, I mean, we do have the report mentions there's the one film. What's his name? James. Is it Wan? No.
Oh, James Mangold.
James Mangold. Thank you.
Yeah.
His film is like so timeline wise so far away that like there's like virtually no issue with with the production for that, because it's not relying on anything. It's just in a void almost, right? It's going to be the new earliest point on the timeline.
Yeah.
So like that, they're more free to do whatever they want, just because they're not, messing with the canon of the Old Testament. It predates the Old Testament, if you want to keep using that that analogy. But I mean, I'm thinking of like, because we have Skeleton Crew right around the corner, and that's like, it's like Star Wars meets like the old 80s style of like E.T. and Indiana Jones and kind of
the Goonies.
Yeah, it's drawing on that. That's a weird way of doing nostalgia, because that's like real life nostalgia for like that kind of storytelling or that kind of setting where we see the suburbs in Star Wars, which makes my brain kind of like feel weird, but like it like we can do that kind of stuff. And like there is like, if I don't know if you've ever read the books, but like there's a book, there's a Star Wars book called Red Harvest, which is kind of a play on it's a zombie story basically. It's a survival horror book set within Star Wars with like zombie stormtroopers and stuff like that. And it's like there is like you say, like the universe is so rich that you can do these different kinds of genres, but as you move closer, like if you want to say like books comics and books are like the low tier of the canon of overall Star Wars, and then the TV shows are like the next level of the further up the rung in terms of what's canon. And then once you get to the films, like once you get closer and closer further up the ladder, then they get cold feet. They get cold feet with what they can tell and what they want to tell. And it's like, well, if you want to be creative with Star Wars, then you need to be lower on the rung in terms of how broad or how much reach your project has, right? With books and sort of D plus, right? With the whole acolyte being the acolyte being like the brainchild of I forgot her name already.
Leslie Headland.
Thank you. Right. And like they're like, okay, we'll let you do this thing. You can do all you want to tell this kind of story. Like okay, and that got review bombed, and like, we already talked about there's legitimate issues there, but like there is this apprehension when you get to the gold standard of Star Wars with the films where like we don't want to mess around too much, right? We want to. The article even goes into it where it's like you've kind of wrapped up everything with all the original heroes, and now like Rey is the new, like she's the one leading the new canon kind of stuff, and it's like, and they have like, I think they said they have multiple films planned around her, maybe not just her trilogy, but maybe they do have like other side stories and stuff they want to do with her, and it's like, well, then just find a way to like create new characters, or like don't be so timid, because even though you're afraid of like something bombing or not doing well, like the time's going to pass by no matter what. And we've had, like you're saying, we're going to have 7 years without anything. And it's like, you probably could have done something that maybe wouldn't be a resounding success, but would have generated some kind of income and would have at least kept Star Wars forefront in people's consciousness. You know what I mean? They could have done something. So I guess, I don't know, like the article talks about like how writing, the New Testament kind of stuff, like how much can you milk, or not milk, I don't want to use that term, maybe it's appropriate, but like how can you rely on nostalgia when you've wrapped up pretty much all there is of the old nostalgia, right? Other than Grogu and stuff, which is already in the work, like that's already almost done, like you said, like what else is beloved from Star Wars now that can still be I don't want to say exploited, but it can still be used to carry, the shoulders of this franchise forward.
Yeah, I mean, exploitation is not even necessarily the wrong term at all. I mean, it's just literally exploiting IP is just like an industry term, and those are sort of in the. I think that's the sort of vocabulary that is being mostly used to talk about Star Wars, and I just think that the spirit of Star Wars was not originally, and even through the era of the prequels, I would argue, not as interested with this sort of reverence that Disney holds it to. I mean, obviously George goes back and he retouches his original trilogy with the special editions, and in some ways, to me, that's even like it's a move Disney would never consider. Like you have to imagine they've had conversations about, well, do we simply remake A New Hope? And I think that they would not do that. To me, when you look at George saying, okay, there's actually a lot of things I want to do different in these movies, even if the broad consensus is that his different is not better, his willingness to do that, I think, illustrated a different feeling and a different priority than Disney has. I like the prequels a lot. I grew up with the prequels. And that's obviously something that Disney's not really interested in trying to exploit either. I mean, yes, the Clone Wars is great, and Dave Filoni has more space on that side. But where are the rumors that X director who like worked on some Jurassic Park or some superhero movie is going to come over and make a new Clone Wars film? They don't exist. There's this very narrow band of what Disney is interested in. And that narrow band includes material that they clearly view as entirely sacred. And I just don't think that is really smart. Because even if, my ideal new Star Wars project, unconcerned, unburdened with any of the canon, any of the lore, any of it, is not a financially sound one, and I understand that.
Unburdened with what has been, Abram?
Yeah, exactly. I understand why that's not a good idea, but moreover, it's not a good idea to be sitting on the Star Wars brand untapped for theaters for the better part of a decade.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be an understanding that there's a middle way. And when I think about like a middle way, I think about what BioWare did with Knights of the Old Republic. We're obviously both big fans of Knights of the Old Republic. What's interesting about KOTOR in the Old Republic era is that BioWare said, okay, we're going to come in here and we're going to be at the phalanx of a new era of Star Wars in the timeline. And when you play KOTOR, it's full of touchstones that are very familiar. You got your Wookiees, you got your Jedi, you got your droids, like it's there. But the mode of storytelling is different. Obviously, the aesthetics are different, although, of course, evocative. and you're still on familiar planets for parts of KOTOR, but I just don't really see why you can't, as a Disney executive, say, okay, we're clearly unable to keep operating in this mode of Skywalker saga storytelling, but we're also totally unwilling to break from it entirely. Why can't we follow this model of the Old Republic or the High Republic and say, let's simply wipe the board clean and think about one layer deeper? What do people like about Star Wars? They like the aliens, they like the robots, they like the Force, they like the sense of adventure, they like this general feel of the score. Why can't you take all of that and put it into something that's a little bit different? It has a totally different set of characters, they have a different priority, there's a different set of themes. To me, that's the way. This is the way, you know. I just, to me, it seems almost evident. Why don't you just break? Don't do episode 10. Don't go back and do an episode 0 or something. Just say, hey, we're going to either get way before the timeline, way after it, or exist in parallel someplace, and just try a story. I think that it's not true that people love Star Wars for Luke, Leia, and Han. I think it's that they love the feeling of Luke, Leia, and Han.
Mm-hmm.
And they recapture that feeling with Poe, Finn, and Rey. And I think you could do it again. And I think you could do it without saying this is a continuation of the Skywalker saga. I don't actually think that's what people need. And maybe I'm wrong, but to me, there's a world where Star Wars is a sort of a box of aesthetics, but not a box of plot points. I think that's the problem. There's a difference between trying to evoke nostalgia through remixing aesthetics and through trying to retell a similar story or the same story or continuous story. So my ideal realistic reboot, as it were, for Star Wars would be just saying, okay, let's have a new ensemble adventure story in this new pocket of the universe where we try to, similar to a KOTOR, similar to a High Republic, remix what Star Wars looks like and sounds like. So it's familiar, but it's new, and it's not beholden to retelling the same plot beats of a New Hope or following another arc of a Skywalker. That's what I would do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have been asking that for years and years and years. People have been asking, like, when are we going to get, like, a, you know, an Old Republic film, some kind of film, even like when people talk about the Old Republic, like we think of the most people just think of the trailers, right? The cinematic trailers. We're like, oh, yeah. Like, you know, the action, like we have like the cowboy looking dude who's clearly inspired off of Han. Like we have like these character archetypes of like a smuggler and a Jedi master and her Padawan, and there's a Sith Lord, and then there's like a clone stand-in for like a clone trooper with a like you said, like they're about people being in love with, like, it's more the elements and the archetypes and the actual, like, it has to be Leia. It's like we have like Jyn Erso, we have those archetypes of like scattered across Star Wars. Like it doesn't have to be that. And I know you're right. You're right about how they should be able to just kind of reshuffle, like I don't know, like making like a Pokemon game with just different routes or something. Basically, that's basically what it is, right? Just do Star Wars and just like either visit it, or there's so much of a rich timeline, like a rich tapestry of like you can create any kind of story really, and like it maybe it doesn't have to be like macro size like Death Stars, but it can be, you know, like Dune. Like Dune takes place on one planet for the entire time, and all the politics of the, you know, galaxy revolve around that specific planet. Like it doesn't have to be like a big old thing, but you can tell a high stakes story still. Like you talked about like a heist, right? That was a high stakes story. And what was the war film? Like you can do those things. You can still inspire emotions with characters that we connect through. Like even if their last name isn't like royalty, you know, associated with Skywalker or something, like you can do something like that. And you can like even though the droids in KOTOR don't look anything, I mean they kind of do sort of. They still have like your protocol droids that look like a budget C-3PO, and like the framework is there if you can just find. I refuse to believe that there isn't any good ideas being pitched. I just don't believe that. Yeah. I'm sure there is. Like you have all these big some of them are not proven directors. Some of them are. I'm not going to get into the film side because that's not my expertise. But like, you can't tell me there is like there's scarce pool of like directors you can draw upon or writers who love and know Star Wars intimately. They can make something really good if you just kind of loosen the reins and don't view it as something so sacred and holy that it has to be 100% perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think what it invites us to think about is the negative side of working on Star Wars, which has been an unfortunate element of Star Wars for a long time. I mean, going back to obviously the harassment that Ahmed Best faced as Jar Jar Binks back when Phantom Menace came out. Like, there's always been a vitriolic side to the Star Wars fandom that I wouldn't be surprised if that's what pushes a lot of people away from being interested in working on the series. I mean, what everybody involved with the Acolyte went through just earlier this year is pretty shocking. But I also feel as though part of it is invited by Disney by trying to tell stories that are going to run afoul of this sense of canon that people hold so tightly. Like, to me, it always feels like something of a futile exercise to do things like put Darth Plagueis in Acolyte, or try to bring back a character like Lando or whatever, or name any, or recharacterize Luke, or name any of the million things that have gotten the worst actors in the community up in arms over the last decade of movies and shows. I think part of it is because there is this fanatical love for the original trilogy, and in sending creative teams to the front line over and over and over again with stories that are going to sort of put a lien on the original trilogy in terms of its canon or in terms of anything, it just feels like a mistake. I think about the Obi-Wan Kenobi, when a big part of the discussion around Kenobi is how it makes A New Hope, the timeline and the character relationships feel shaky. It makes me wonder, well, why did Disney think that you were going to outweigh that by bringing back Obi-Wan? Like, there is I think, a cultural backlash that is encouraged by the stories Disney has chosen to tell. I think you can look at, obviously, we're talking about games, we're talking about books, and these things are in less people's line of fire, these bad actors' line of fire, but there's a lot less people up in arms about the Cal Kestis stories, or even a lot of the High Republic storytelling, because it's off doing its thing. Right. And again, I imagine if you amplified any of that to the scale of a Star Wars episode, then they're going to get a lot of really toxic people, launching their campaigns. But I think it's harder to do so when you're not playing into their hands and giving them sort of something they want, but not in a way that they want it. I think that you would have a healthier creative environment and mitigate a lot of the really toxic conversation around Star Wars if you simply said, okay, we're going to leave this original trilogy stuff alone. We're going to leave the timeline alone. We're going to go over here and we're going to start again, and we're going to start fresh. Obviously, the sequels came under heavy fire, but the sequels didn't really ever separate themselves from the original trilogy ever. Even though it's a clean slate in some ways, it really wasn't in, I think, more material ones. We still don't know what it would look like to say, here is a new trilogy of Star Wars films that has the feeling of Star Wars and a lot of its own ideas, completely removed from any of these other characters. When you do that, I think you also get away from so much of the poison that has been making Star Wars, I think, an unfun community to be a part of for a long time.
No, yeah, I agree. You're talking about the Cal Kestis stuff. There was I'm trying to remember the author's name. She wrote a novel taking place between the first and second game, and people actually came after her for that too, because her name was like Maggie something. Can't remember her name, but she's another target for people who don't really like diverse storytelling. I can't remember her name exactly, but like that was an issue. So even though the games there wasn't really an issue, just that someone was near in orbit of that that portion of the franchise, like there was like a target on her back too, just because of like I guess other stuff she's written or things she's said in the past or something about Star Wars, and people were like all up in arms about it. And I think you're right. I think there is a lot of baggage with Star Wars with the community where they kind of just it's weird. I think of like if you ever seen the meme with the guy who's sweating, there's 2 buttons he has to press, and it's like people love old Star Wars, but like, and then the other one's like the buttons label like people are tired of the same thing. So it's like, well, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? Like, like how much can you keep retelling like the same kind of stuff without like, I mean, that one of my criticism was like, I feel like the Force Awakens is like, it plays it too safe. It's too it's too similar, right? It's the desert planet. We've already talked about that. I'm not gonna go through that again. But then like when we do get something like The Last Jedi, which is very, very, very different from anything else. I'm not the biggest fan of Last Jedi, but I give it praise for at least being different. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh, no, this has nothing to do with, this is completely different from Star Wars. So it's like, how do you tread that middle line of being like just a rehash of the same thing and not being too different? And it's like you said, like it's you have people who you can't like really please. I mean, recently, I think it was George Lucas at Con, like this past year, he mentioned about how like he wrote Star Wars for kids, and then no one liked his other stuff later on because they weren't kids anymore. And it's like, well, like you have all these different quadrants sort of, or if you want to think of it as like a Venn diagram of like new fans, old fans, and like what's the thing where they all can kind of agree on or fit in. And it's really hard to do that. I mean, I think other than Andor and even the Mandalorian, like which has like mostly universal praise, here and there with a couple of things, right? Like that kind of meets in the middle. But it's like, how can you tell how, like I feel we can't do this thing of doing these stories by committee anymore. I feel like they have to be just, kind of entrusted, that you have to have faith in the people who are going to be doing your films and stuff, and just let them do what they're going to do, and stop trying to like, when you pigeonhole someone into like, we got to appeal to all these sectors of, your 40 something white-year-old guys and your, diverse younger cast, and you try to do that, it's like, you're not going to win. You're not going to win. You're not going to get everybody on board. So you might as well just do exactly what you want to do and just make a film that appeals to everybody, but it's not too different or not. I'm kind of stumbling over my words here.
I understand what you mean. I think it's actually a really good point you raised, because when you go back to the first 6 movies, especially when you're looking at the prequels, because obviously there is a lot of intervention from various people, from George Lucas's wife editing A New Hope for him, from an apparently unwatchable 4-hour version to the classic version we have now, to the various people that stepped in to help write the scripts for the other 2 original films who directed them. There's a little bit more collaboration there, but by the time you get to the prequels, it's just George, and it's just George's vision. And I think that results in a more interesting film. Not necessarily the best movie, 100%, but an interesting one. And I think that a dimension of the issue with Star Wars is that it's losing its interest for people who aren't like us and who are bought into the lore. Because it is this, and this is my main criticism against The Rise of Skywalker. It's as though you can watch the movie and you can close your eyes and you can almost hear the voices of the different executives who are reviewing that script and marking it up of, okay, we need this character here. We need to get Lando in for this moment. We need to end with the saber and the voices of the Jedi and the sky. It's a mistake. I agree with you. When you look at something like Andor, having the largely singular voice of Tony Gilroy writing a lot of that show, there's a big difference, not even just in quality, but in clarity of idea. Compared to something like a Rise of Skywalker or even a Force Awakens. I like Force Awakens a lot, but I would never sit here and defend its plot structure, really. I I think that it requires a desire on Disney's part to take a risk that I don't
Mhm.
know if they have necessarily to do that. To say, I don't know, I'm just going to pull a dream scenario out of my hat. They get Denis Villeneuve wraps up doing Messiah. He's the slight's clear. In 10 years down the line, he's got a Star Wars movie coming out. The idea of him and a small team of people he trusts making a Star Wars movie is exceptional. But even, sub him out, put in anybody else you want, put in any director you like. The idea of one person with some small, with a small group of people who are checking them to put out a great movie, similar to what George had with the OT, would be very successful and very interesting. But it require relinquishing in a corporate change in a way that I don't think Disney is able to facilitate. I think part of the problem also is a sort of adherence to Marvel. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a real belief that the what Kevin Feige pioneered with the MCU um, is a format that can work for Star Wars, and I simply don't think it's true.
Yeah.
I just don't think they're capable of that. They don't have the cadence of releases for that. They don't have the infrastructure for that, and I think that at a certain point you have to kind of cut the cable and say, okay, we have to get away from all this stuff. We have to dump it out the airlock, and we have to give it a go over here. Or you have to simply cede this ground and say Star Wars is done in the theater. And I just think that doesn't make any sense. I'm really, really, really interested to see how The Mandalorian and Grogu does.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there's a big chance that that movie doesn't do well. I think there's
Really?
a big chance that, like, your average person goes to the theater and, like, who the fuck are any of these characters? And they're like, I didn't watch a Book of Boba Fett. Why does Grogu have chainmail? Why is he hanging around the Mandalorian? Who's Ahsoka? What is any of this? I don't know what this is. I don't want to go home. I can just go watch the Mandalorian at home. Why am I going to watch this? To me, it's clearly them trying to determine whether or not Kevin Feige can be emulated by Dave Filoni. And if Dave
Mm.
Filoni can parlay a successful Mandalorian show into a successful Mandalorian movie, maybe in fact a more Marvel-esque Star Wars future in cinemas is possible. But I'm just very skeptical that it's going to work. I'm not skeptical that the Mandalorian movie would be bad by any means, but I just wonder, is it too niche? I mean, we watch the viewership of these Star Wars shows drop and drop and drop and drop and drop and drop, no matter the quality, and or wasn't viewed by that many people, comparatively speaking. Is there a chance that people just look at that and say, I don't want this either? I don't know. I think it's a very, very strange position to be in when a brand that has been resilient for 50 years at this point feels so totally imperiled and seemingly completely unable to release a movie, when to me the solution is right there. It's start again. But what do I know, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of other franchises that try to do that, right? I mean the closest, because of just the relation, is like Star Trek, right? Star Trek, they did the whole with JJ Abrams. Like I never in my life Abrams seen a single Star Trek show. But I went into that first Star Trek film that he did, and I was not lost. I didn't feel like I was really missing anything, and it was just a
Yeah.
clean slate. It was a clean slate, and it was meant to be like it's okay if you've never seen Star Trek. It's okay. We're gonna have like a story that's gonna be easy to follow. You're gonna meet these characters for the first time, and it's gonna be like the first time they meet each other, and it's basically a reboot, right? Just in a film form, right? And then I saw the second one, which I think I think Edge of Darkness is the second one. Maybe I'm not sure, but the second one with Khan, and like I don't know, I never seen Wrath of Khan. I never seen the old William Shatner. I've never seen anything, and I was able to just like that kind of drew me in, and it didn't really draw me in into the entire franchise. But I know people who saw one of my cousins saw those movies, and he got into Star Trek, the greater overall Star Trek stuff later on after that. And so I feel like you could just do that with Star Wars. It's just that you have to be willing to take a lot of heat from online from a lot of people. If you could, it doesn't have to be a New Hope. If you can just, I don't know, do something that's not like you said. And I'm not going to use the same analogy about being burdened by the past, but if you could just say this is Star Wars, and I don't know, and not like you say, don't say when on the timeline. I think that does all. I think that leaving that like as a mystery does away with a lot of issues. People be like, well, does this conflict with the like just be very maybe at the end hint something at the end like gives like a hint of like where it takes place or something. But like if you could just do something like that where it's the same emotional beats, doesn't have to be necessarily the same plot points, but the same kind of the hero's journey, right? Same thing, someone on a far-flung urban planet, and introduce them to this greater conflict, galactic conflict, and go through the motions. Doesn't have to be your father, maybe just it could just be some greater evil, and just kind of go through their like the chosen destiny hero, whatever. Like I feel like that's such a story. Who is Spielberg, right? Who said there's only like 6 stories or something like that, right? Like you can pick one of those, right? That's one of those, right? Is the hero's journey. That I'm sure that's one of the 6, and it would introduce a whole slew of new people to Star Wars, and then still hit like make references, make like little hints. Maybe I have a bad idea about this. You use some old classic lines. Like you can still have the Star Wars charm. You can still hit all the beats and like create something that's going to draw new people. And maybe you might shed some old fans or something here and there, but like if you want to keep this franchise relevant, it needs the updating. And we kind of talked about it in the past, even like we talked about like how the special editions kind of keep these films sort of perennial in a way where like they're like the either graphically or storytelling wise, like you kind of keep them like updated. I feel like you kind of need that for the overall franchise as a whole.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think this idea we've come up with of you need to get off the timeline is a really critical one. I just think that it doesn't benefit Disney to keep working in this framework. Because what more is there really to do because clearly the goal is to not just release a one-off movie. I think part of the reason why we didn't get Rogue Squadron, why we didn't get what you were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, is that clearly Disney's not interested in that. They're interested in, as we know by Simon Kinberg apparently coming in to do episodes 10, 11, and 12, which I don't think is going to happen, but apparently that's something on the table. Clearly they're looking for, okay, what's this new in for us to move forward? And I think the in is as you're describing. I think Star Trek is a very, very apt comparison in this respect, or the Planet of the Apes movies. Is it really such a bad thing to say, okay, this is a new continuity? In some ways, I feel like that would go over better than saying, okay, we've just turned all of the old canon you love into Legends. Like it almost just feels too obvious. And so I if I could get like a USB stick with hundreds of hours of boardroom meetings about Star Wars on it, I would be fascinated to pour through that and listen and try to ascertain why this idea that we're throwing out of a reboot, which is no doubt been discussed, hasn't come to pass, or a remake of A New Hope. Or a Clone Wars.
I'm sure we'll get that book one day. I'm sure we'll get that as a book someday.
I would love that. I'd be so fascinated. I'm curious just to this idea of returning to the Clone Wars, this idea of getting back into prequel storytelling to some extent. I wonder if that's an idea they think about as well. Because the way that the prequels have been reclaimed in a lot of ways, I think mostly by a younger generation of people my age or so, setting the tenor for discussion and saying, okay, hey, we actually really like these movies. I wonder if they look at that and say, maybe there's something here. I don't know if there is. I'm like I think that Ahsoka, the flashbacks to like Captain Rex and like live action clones, it feels a little bit hokey to me. I don't know if it would work. I don't know. Again, you run into the same problem of, well, we're just repackaging a different, a younger type of nostalgia, and that too is going to have a shelf life. Anything I consider like this in my head, I just come back to, well, you simply either got to reboot it, or you have to continue to be satisfied with just making Disney Plus shows.
Yeah, yeah, complete. I mean, It wasn't that long ago, Avery. It wasn't that long ago where you said you would be content if they never made another Star Wars film again. Like, you would be fine with Star Wars living on forever as a Disney Plus movie or TV series, or as just little mini series, and just keep the canon going like that.
and I still don't hate that idea, because it's clear that there is this space to experiment in animation, to experiment in different genres, to have shows for clearly different demographics, looking at Skeleton Crew versus an Andor, or even the Young Jedi Adventures show, or whatever that thing is called.
You saw the little graphic I put with all the every single thing in order.
I feel like there's a that flexibility and that spirit I value a lot, and for me that's good enough. I have a big enough TV, it still feels special when one of these shows comes out. But yeah, I mean, let's read a comment, actually. So one submission
I was
from
wondering
our friend
when we were
Steven.
yeah.
And I think this would be an interesting thing to discuss as we're
let's just pivot. Let's pivot.
Yeah, coming out of the conversation here. Steven says, I've been listening to Star Wars podcast, A More Civilized Age, because they've been reading through the Throne trilogy, and it's been fascinating. A series written before the prequels and before there were strict rules around lore and minutiae. It presents it all differently. Suggests Luke and Leia were born to Vader, that Vader was mechanized over time, had a deeply different understanding of what the Force is and what the Clone Wars are. It's a Star Wars that still has a discovery rather than repetition. I want some of that back, but I also want that time period. Andor is so good for many reasons, but a big one is that it focuses on how systems operate outside of the big, heroic moments linked to the operators of history in the Star Wars saga, the Skywalkers and company. It's also great because it's about aftermath and rebuilding. In this way, the building of an empire following a covert coup and a purge. We see how this happens on a political scale and how it affects people, as well as how power operates. To return to the Thrawn books, these deal with aftermath and building. That post-episode 6 period is tantalizing. The Empire doesn't just die, power doesn't just dissipate, and even the actions of the Alliance are only known to those involved. Our rebels are not leaders, they are forged in the pragmatism of resistance and combat. Leia is outmoded and traditionalist in a fascinating way. Han is a reluctant hero. Lando still has criminal and business links and imperial connections. Luke is a Boy Scout not ready for the reality of the world and is in need of a teacher in a world now without them. This is such a fascinating context. Those who can overthrow but are not best placed to lead. What happens in this power vacuum? What happens to the military leadership of the rebels, and how is democracy reestablished? We know the long view, but as Andor showed, it's the short view that compels. What do you make of Steven's submission? I personally really like this idea of it's a Star Wars that still has discovery rather than repetition.
Yeah, I some of the stuff he was talking about, like how the Force works, like when these books were written, like in the early 90s, like, I mean, all we had really was the original trilogy, and so it's like if you did the Bible again and you're just working with Genesis. It's like, okay, well, we can do everything we want after this, right? There's no strict there's no rules, right? And like, I think he's right. There is I mean, for me, definitely as a kid, Abram, I remember coming up with Star Wars stories in my mind. I are playing, like, as you say, like with, like, in your case with the Clone Trooper toys, or like for me it was just in my backyard swinging a stick and then just filling in the gaps, like, because there were bigger gaps to fill in, and that was tantalizing. That was fun. I was discovering. Playing games like Shadows of the Empire, like, oh, what happens in that gap between, Empire and Return of the Jedi, and like when you had those smaller little, we had less restrictions. You were able to come up with this, just all sorts of interesting stuff. One of the interesting things, I don't know if you know, it was in the old EU, because of those first 3 films, it was always assumed in the books that all Jedi Masters just dissolved when they died. That was because that's what happened to Obi-Wan. That's what happened to Vader, right? Those 2 figures, right? A lot of those early books just assume that when the Jedi dies, that there's no body left over. They just evaporate. And it wasn't until the prequel trilogy we learned that's not true. We see Qui-Gon being burned on the funeral pyre, and like Oh, that was the thing that was taught. Like that wasn't just and so like all those books now had to like retcon with like future and stuff like that. So like there was less stringent rules, and it was kind of like, oh, like this is what happens because all we have is the book or the movie to go off of, right? Those three original
Yeah.
movies, and I think that it is fun. I remember Stephen also mentions, maybe not in that post, but later on, about like the use of English, like normal Earth words, like when Han says, "Well, I'll see you in hell," and it's like, okay, like that's, does
Yeah.
Christianity exist in Star Wars? No, not necessarily, but that's, maybe Earth is a outer rim world. Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? Galaxy far away, right? So things like that can be thrown in, and now like it's like there's a very strict, like you have to, like Arbish is, or what, Arbosh, whatever, is like a
Yeah.
actual language, right? And people will watch trailers and they'll try to decipher what it means based off. You go to the Star Wars portion of Disneyland, and there's Arbish, and there's like an app for like live. You know what I mean? Like it's way more structured now. All Star Wars is
Yeah.
very structured, very by the rules, almost law like, right? And I'm even talking about like the Senate or so. I mean, like actual
I
in
know what
terms
you
of like
mean.
how
Yeah.
everything operates within the greater universe of Star Wars, right? And so I think this kind of goes back to what you said, Abraham, about like get away from the timeline, like allow things to kind of exist. That's why I'm more excited about the whole Dawn of the Jedi film more than any of the other film projects, because I'm excited to get to a point where like you're able to lay down the foundations even below the foundations of the original trilogy. Like that
Yeah.
sounds like it's such like a exciting, like my mind wanders, like what are they gonna do? What are they gonna do? Kind of stuff. Where you're getting away from the rules and you're kind of sort of almost setting up the rules for all the stuff that comes later. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
But going back to what Steven was saying about I don't know if you want to talk about the Thrawn part, because yeah, have you read the trilogy by any chance?
I haven't.
Okay, but it's very similar to what we're kind of seeing in the Ahsoka stuff, anyways, in
Yeah.
Mandalorian, with Thrawn's like he's the new threat. He's comes from a period of like he's much more refined, right? He comes from the Empire, but he also existed from like the Old Republic, also a little bit. Like he has, he's a military guy. He understands how governments should work and stuff like that. And like we've talked about this with Ahsoka about the New Republic, how they have these characters who are now like, okay, we won, now what, right? Like, how do we build from here and stuff? And so I think Steven's right. Like, it is interesting to get into that kind of stuff where fill in these gaps of what happened between this episode and that episode. Like, how do we get from here to there? I think that stuff that Steven mentions is very interesting. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
Star Wars is missing some of that discoverability, and I think we can kind of get into that a little bit more if we go more into because Ahsoka sets up a lot of mysteries. At the end of Ahsoka, there's a lot of mysteries being set up with the Mortis God statues, and it's like there is room for discovery. There is room to build off, but you're gonna have to look towards more new material to create new mysteries to really build off. I feel like
Yeah.
everything's been excavated from the original trilogy, from the old stuff. That stuff has been picked clean through pretty much. But if you want if you want more like new material, new mysteries, you're gonna have to go to newer stuff and hope that we get more questions and maybe less answers, but more open-ended questions of Star Wars, and let's see like where they build off of that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that Dave Filoni is willing to do that. Obviously, the Clone Wars is his baby, so when he brings Cad Bane or Ahsoka or whoever to live action, it's self-serving, obviously, but he has a wider view of Star Wars than I think these executives, as discussed in this THR article, have. But nonetheless, and I think I said this in our review when we talked about Ahsoka as it ended, Star Wars is getting too nerdy even for me with some of this Dave Filoni stuff. I'm like, I don't have any fucking idea what you're talking about. Like when they show the Mortis statue, I'm like, I don't know what that is. I just straight up don't know what that is. And I think that the danger, and it's a danger that I think Marvel encountered, and a trap they fell directly into, of saying, okay, we just gotta mine for even deeper layers of fan service. When I like the suggestion that you raised of saying, well, indeed, actually, maybe the way you prompt an interest in the world again is by having new material, not deeper, more esoteric material. And I disagree with Stephen in the particular, although I agree in the main of, I don't think that the particulars of post episode 6 or pre episode 4 are that bountiful of times to mine anymore, because I think that became a quick solution. And obviously there's a ton of stuff, shows, games, books, everything between episodes 3 and 4, and post 6 now too as well. I think we just need to get away from these big touchstones. What I like that Stephen is mentioning in a general sense is not only this idea of discovery, but moreover this idea of real thematic context. I think that another part of what kind of closes a lot of Star Wars stuff off to people, and what I think made Andor very interesting and exciting, was that the thematic content of Andor is interesting whether you really care about Star Wars that deeply or not. And sometimes I think even The Last Jedi, which I love a lot, and there's a larger point to it interrogating like foundations of Star Wars texts and the importance of lightsabers or the book, still Jedi books or whatever, it's still very insider baseball. It's like, this is a provocative idea if you've been like reverentially loving Star Wars your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Andor is literally just about like revolutionary violence. That's what
with
the show's
Star
about.
Wars skin.
Yeah. And I think that as we sort of wandered down a conversation, piecing together all the blocks we need to come up with our own future for Star Wars, I'm looking at a couple pillars. I'm looking at how can we recapture the feeling of Star Wars, as we've been talking about with archetypes and things, not necessarily direct references, but the scoundrel, the Jedi, things like that. Can we get that told by a director who's able to have a singular vision brought to screen? Can we do that outside of the confines of the timeline? And then can we pair with that a set of themes that are universal or interesting beyond Star Wars? Obviously, George Lucas has talked extensively about how the Vietnam War is a important touchstone in the theming of the original trilogy. Andor is similar. What real world political context can inform this reboot? And finally, I think the final point I want to raise, Andrew, is what other texts outside of Star Wars can be pulled in? Should we be looking at more spectacle driven, but also sort of more hard science fiction that maybe Nolan or Villeneuve make? Should we be saying, actually, let's go look at these sort of really anxiety inducing crime cinema of like the Safdie brothers who did Good Time and Uncut Gems? Can we go and pull in, I don't know, can we go and pull in elements of like noir? Can we get that director who has their own vision, who has an interest in that thing, in that genre, in this creator, and suffuse all that into Star Wars again? That's another key part. And that's why, for as many problems as Acolyte has, as we praise quite heavily, Leslie Headland's interest in wuxia and interest in that mode of Asian action filmmaking gave the Acolyte a necessary, unique flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the last part of my future for Star Wars, and I'd leave it there. Director who has control over their vision, a story that's removed from the timeline, a story that relies on the archetypes, not the direct references, a story that's influenced by works from other genres and in other mediums. How about somebody who loves literature and painting? And then there was another one that I forgot, but people are watching the video, so maybe they'll remember and they can leave it in the comments. That's my picture for the future of Star Wars. What's yours, Andrew? From this high level, you can just push the ball down the hill, and then it's going to pick up steam and roll from there. What's your recipe? I just gave mine. And we'll close it there.
Going off of what you said, like half jokingly, half serious, like if they really want to, if Disney just wanted to just do a cash grab, just make money, is you just make a Michael Bay Star Wars film and just set it during some conflict or some major conflict, and then just go ham on the effects and, you know, cut the check and you know, cash money making machine. But you're going to be pissing off a lot of other Star Wars fans who maybe aren't there for just visual and meat or metal blenders and all sorts of nonsense. But that'd be the easy way if I wasn't thinking long term. I'm like, we just need to make something like, okay, just get Michael Bay on the phone, wow them with your effects, and that'd be it. That would just cut him a check and we're done. But no, but seriously, like I kind of thought about this for a couple of days since you like told me, like, hey, let's do this episode. I kind of just like, my mind kind of wandered around of like, what would be things I would want to see in Star Wars, and like we've done like the heist, we've done the revolution, we've done war, we've done this wushu. Like if I was going off like film tropes, I really think, and I just know it's not going to happen because of audience appeal, but like you could do a Star Wars horror film. But again, I know the audiences aren't going to go for that, and Disney's not going to go for that. And there's just so many logistical reasons why that just would not play out. But I'm like, you can do that. Like Star Wars is so rich that you can really do anything. I mean, people will tell you like, I'm sure there's like a legal breakdown of the prequel trilogy from a business / political, someone who knows politics can tell you exactly the rise of the Emperor through if you ever read the Darth Plagueis novel, like half of that book is just how Plagueis got Palpatine on as Chancellor in position to even put the plan into like fruition and stuff. So like there's like so many genres. I mean, I would like to see kind of a Star Wars film that maybe leaned a little more into comedy as well. Like I'm not saying give Jar Jar an entire solo, Star Wars story Jar Jar, but like I feel like you could do something amusing that doesn't have to be animated like a cartoon or something, but you could probably come up with a comic. I don't know, like Plagueis's bed dorm. I don't know. I'm kind of joking. I'm joking about that one in the Michael Bay one, but like the horror one I was serious about. I feel like they could do something like that. But like, I mean, if you want to, like, the Mandalorian is kind of Western, it has Western flavor. Like there is room for all sorts of things, and like if it probably wouldn't be that popular, but you could probably even do like a more romance kind of style story if you wanted. I mean, I think Han and Leia kind of carry romance for Star Wars anyways already, like, so there's not really much room for that. But I mean, or that could just be a book idea. Honestly, that could just be a book idea. But I feel, there's so much room for different things. I like that it could adapt the Red Harvest story, which is really cool. It's very alien like, which it makes sense because it's space and stuff. Like it's told in a very like, it feels like it's like a freaking Dead Space, like this crippled ship floating down the middle of nowhere. Let's go investigate, because that's always a good idea, and things happen from there. Like you could do that. We just saw this, how people love the last Alien movie, and I'm not even a Romulus, and like I've heard great things about it, not just from like cinematics in terms of like camera work and everything. Like you can do lots of things with Star Wars if you just were open to it, but. Yeah. I don't know. I guess like I said, like I would love to see, like Top Gun Maverick's like one of my favorite films of all time now. And like when I watched it, I'm like, man, like imagine if they did like a Death Star trench run, and that film is basically the Death Star trench run, but you have the camera in the cockpit, like not so up close like in traditional Star Wars films where like it's like right in their face, but like show us like the the dome, the glass dome around them, do like the maneuvers, make us like feel like. I guess there's no like G-forces in space, but come up with something like I want to see, like, when there's an explosion, see the flash across the character, like, the pilot's face from outside. Like, what I mean? Like, you could do really dope stuff like that if you just allow, or maybe recruit people who can do that kind of stuff. Like, I feel like Disney is not, their position where they have like, like screw you money. They can make this kind of stuff, and it's just kind of like, let's play it safe. Rey's the new, the new face, and I have no problem with that. I love Daisy Ridley. I love her as Rey, but I'm like, it's like the Inception meme, kind of like you gotta be afraid. You can't be afraid to dream a little bit bigger. It's that kind of thing.
100%. And I mean, the last thing I'll just say to close out is, just on the point about Rey, I love Rey. I think Rey is very, very, very cool. And so if Disney wants to say, hey, look, we're locking it in. We're going with Rey. We're doing episode 10 with Rey. We're doing episode 11 with Rey. We're doing episode 12. And we're getting further and further into the future. And there are less and less original characters around, I think that's also cool. I think that would actually offer a lot of the same opportunities we've been wishing for in this discussion, but it requires a clarity of vision. I think what we're both asking for at the highest level is an ability to take risks in the sort of clarity of vision, which is clearly not indicative of where Star Wars is at the moment. So it'll be really curious to see, Andrew, which movie other than Mandalorian and Grogu actually makes it to theaters. And
I really want the Dawn of the Jedi one. Like, please don't scrap that one. Don't put that on the back burner. I really want
that too. I feel like it became imperiled as soon as Dial of Destiny came out. Dial of Destiny, also James Mangold movie.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Not a good movie, I would say. And it makes me a little bit nervous just because it's, from my view, clear that Dial of Destiny had a lot of by committee decisions until the end of the movie, where it just becomes like, what the fuck is even going on? But that's a different conversation about Indiana Jones, another Lucasfilm property. But
it's adjacent.
Yeah. But Andrew, I think it's been a very fruitful discussion, and obviously, we're going to email this video right to Kathleen Kennedy. I'm sure she's going to watch it, and I'm sure we're going to get a call in a couple days. Get flown out to, I don't know where they're, probably like fucking Burbank, California or something. And we'll pitch our Star Trek style reboot of the series, and we'll get rich off of
it. An alternate timeline universe, maybe.
But Andrew, what would we need? What would we need for all these chips to fall in just the right way for us? It'd have to be something maybe with us that would help guide our fortunes. Wouldn't you say so, Andrew? If you had to come with some sort of like phrase that could encapsulate this idea, it'd be on your pillow.
It's out right on my pillow right there. May the Force be with us, or you. Definitely Lucasfilm, though.
With Lucasfilm, please.